Welcome to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we equipped you to more effectively lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. Each week, we help you sharpen your leadership acumen by cracking open the playbooks of dynamic leaders who are doing big things in their professional endeavors. And now your host, leadership tactics and organizational development expert, Karen Farrell-Rhodes.
Hello, my superstars. This is Karen, and welcome to another episode of the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast. I am so thrilled to have on today's show dear colleague who I just fell in love with the first time we had a chance to chat. And after a fantastic conversation, I just knew I had to bring her onto the podcast. We're so pleased to have Naama Zalzman, and I wanted to make sure I didn't murder her name. Hopefully I didn't. But she is the founder and CEO of Effective Leadership Across Cultures. She's an organizational and cultural consultant who has worked with over 100 tech companies from seed stage to IPO, which is amazing, I'm sure, watching those journeys. But on top of it, one of her superpowers, she's also focused on multicultural leadership. And she's worked with multicultural teams from a ton of countries, including like Israel, countries in Europe, Asia, and of course, our old United States. So I am so thrilled to have her on the show. And I love having more global perspectives on the show. And she is definitely fitting that bill. So welcome to the podcast, Naama.
Thank you so much, Karen, for having me.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to delve into our conversation, but we always typically love to know a little bit about our guest on a personal level. So for just as much as you feel comfortable, could you give us a sneak peek into your life outside of work?
Of course, with pleasure. So I live in New York City, born and raised in Israel, as you know, married to Oran, that you know as well, and a mom to Adam. A fun fact about me and even about us as a family is that until now, we've spent about 6 to 7 months a year in New York City, and the rest of the time we work and travel. Again, we across the globe, you can say. So luckily, my family also loves to explore and new cultures as much as I do. So
wow, that's amazing. So you're not traveling as much anymore?
Adam's he just turned 3, so as you can imagine, here in the U.S., he's at school, and it's pretty hard to to go back to school. We just came back from Mexico City. It's the 7th country we've been to last year. So I guess that next year it's going to be harder
to
maintain it.
Definitely. But you know what? You find ways to kind of fit it in and make do. And, you just enjoy him at that age. So, it's amazing. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And I'd love to go ahead and start delving a little bit into our topic. But let's first start, if you can share with our listeners just a high level of your professional journey thus far, and then all the way up to the type of consulting that you're doing today.
Of course. So I'm a leadership consultant. I specialize in business psychology and cross-cultural management, meaning that I work with global teams, global leaders, and I help them to communicate, work, and execute more effectively together. I work with companies, but also with venture capital firms, companies like, from PwC, Weeks, Meta, Lightrix, Google, and others. I did spend most of my career in venture capital and business development. And 5 years ago, when I moved to the US, I decided to do a transition to the more organizational side. So today I get a chance to mix between the two worlds that I love the most, which is business, but also the fact that, again, we're all humans, right? So we need to really understand build how we can build relationships in a more effective way.
I love that. And what piqued your curiosity enough to kind of make that transition? Because having a firm myself that supports private equity backed firms a lot and VC backed firms, it's highly dynamic. Things change at a nanosecond, and it's a lot of times very operational focused. So adding on the leadership piece is a very interesting transition. So I'm curious of what piqued your interest to adding that to your repertoire.
So along my career in the last 15 years, I had the pleasure to work with people from different cultures, from the US, from Canada, Germany. When I used to work in venture capital, we had investors from Korea, Japan, Singapore. I used to work with people from India, right? So lots of cultures. And I did lots of mistakes. And I think that at some point in my career, that I guess that you maybe you can relate as well to that, is the fact that I've learned that I usually focus on my KPIs, right? In my case, it was for many years to help companies I work with to generate more revenue. But on the way there, I've learned the hard way that we also need to learn how to build trust with people from different cultures, how we can be an effective communicators, how can we lead without authority. And it's not that easy when you work with people from different cultures that has different benchmarks. So the more I acquired more tools and more knowledge and I read more research about that, I just fell in love in this field. And when I moved here, I knew that this is exactly what I'm going to focus on more and bring my expertise, but also my curiosity to the companies I work with because I know it's hard.
Yes, absolutely. It's hard. And I'm a news junkie and I love to, because, I've traveled extensively as well. I'd love to know or better understand dynamics going on around the world. And it's, really challenging right now, sometimes in the multicultural spaces with, the geopolitics going on and that kind of thing. I'm just curious, what trends are you seeing right now in businesses that leaders are either struggling with or what they're trying to implement to still have productive cultures within their companies?
So I think that in today's world, people understand that we live in a global economy, right? So you can be an American who's doing business in Germany, can be an Israeli who's doing business, in France or in Brazil. And what is really complicated, and again, people understand more and more, is to figure out how to adapt your style to the company and the people that you work with, in order to get the result that you need, right? And many people used to think that the main challenge is to know if should I shake your hand or not. But in most cases, we understand that it's way more delicate than that. And I can give you an example. So I used to work, like I said, in venture capital, and we had investors from Japan. And I still remember the first time that I met some of them. I had a presentation. I gave their presentation, and they, nod their head. So I thought to myself, well, great, we're on the same page, right? They agree with me. But later, I learned that in Japan, when nodding doesn't mean that I agree with you. It's
No.
actually mean that I've just, I'm following what you're saying.
Yes.
So people more and more understand how cultural differences could potentially impact our ability to succeed. So they invest more and more effort in
Yes.
that, manner.
That I love that story. And I have a similar one. I was visiting Tokyo, and I'm an over the chart extrovert and a chatterbox, thus having a podcast, right? But I remember I was working at Microsoft at the time, and we had programs and information. So if you're going to another country, you could kind of get a crash course in business etiquette and things you need to know about the country. So I thought I was miss knowledgeable, having gone through some curriculum for Japan, and I guess I didn't read it as carefully as I should have. But I was just a chatterbox nonstop. And I realized one of my Japanese colleagues pulled me to the side, and it kind of rubbed people the wrong way that I didn't pause to offer them time to speak. I also remember being in a taxi trying to talk to the cab driver because I'm very sociable, and I didn't realize that. And usually, in most cases, people are very quiet in cabs and when they're riding buses or trains, and they put their glance down, usually. And so it was these little tips that I started observing and noticing that really helped, be honest with you, even deepen business relationships once I knew better what to do and not to do, and extended an olive leaf for appreciating their culture. So I totally get that. And I so agree that we all need to be extremely sensitive about that. Do you agree?
Of course. And I think the fact that you were so curious about that, right? The fact that you actually observed, it's more than what
A
many
lot of
other
people
people
do,
would
right?
do. So yeah, because it's very easy for us to behave and talk and communicate in a way that is more intuitive for us.
Yeah,
But it's all about being adaptive. So I think, you definitely, but again, the only way you can actually feel it is when you get a chance to visit other cultures, right?
that's
And
right.
work with other people. It's really hard to figure it out by yourself. So
That's right. That's right. Because you do a lot of coaching in this space. I always have several suggestions or tactics that can help people navigate cultural differences. And I would love if you would share with the listeners a few so that they can, start being more worldview minded, if you will.
course. So, in generally speaking, what I think we should all aim for is to go through as three simple, stages. If we want to be, let's say, an effective global leaders. The first is like the awareness stage, right? It's mean that we need to recognize the fact that, let's say, that we're sitting in a meeting, you and I. So I know that you were born here in the U.S. and you know that I came from Israel, right? So we are being aware to this specific fact. The second stage is being able to identify cultural gaps in real time, meaning that we need to try not to be judgmental, right? And be curious, like you said before. And if there is some kind of like a friction, which we can give more examples later on if you'd like, we need to be able to stop for a second and say, hey, listen, maybe it's not like personal. Maybe there is like a cultural gaps here. And the third stage is being adaptive, like we said before. It's like, so once we understand that there are differences, we can use the right tools. And again, we're going to give a bunch of tools today so people can use to bridge those gaps and prevent misunderstanding and again, solve conflicts as they arise. So these are like the three main stages that I would love any kind of leaders to go through. And again, it's a process, right? It's like a marathon.
Yes, it is. So, how do you make it real?
How do I make it real? So let's talk about communication, right? Because
Okay.
it's one of the most fundamental like topics that we have out
Absolutely.
for the baseline. So studies show us that different cultures define effective communication in different ways. It's very interesting. So if you would ask people from different cultures to think of a colleague of them that, someone that they consider as a good communicator, someone that has a good communication skills, and you would ask them to write down the top three skills or behaviors they're using, you're going to hear different answers,
Yeah,
right?
very
So,
true.
for example, here in the US, you would hear things like someone that verify understanding, right? Allow people to ask questions, give them that space, or someone that do lots of recaps, right? Because we want to verify understanding. But if you would go to more direct cultures like Israel, like Germany, for example, you would hear things like people that are being more decisive, right? That the form of communication would be a bit more short and concise. And so, of course, there is some kind of like overlap. But generally speaking, you would hear like we would define effective communications in different ways. And as you can imagine, this difference could cause a friction. So one of the most common frictions that I've seen is that what I call, too long or too short form of communication. And what do I mean by saying that? There are certain cultures that used to complain, right, that they receive too long emails from their colleagues overseas,
Yeah.
right? Too long
Right.
emails, too long text messages, on Slack and
Uh-huh.
so on.
Right.
Because, like we said before, some cultures prefer a more short and concise form of communication, right? So then what happens, right? And as you can imagine in the US, people provide lots of context.
A lot of context.
The emails tend to be longer than other cultures, right? Like in Germany or in Israel, for example.
Correct.
So, and then what you're going to see is that people that are coming from a more short and concise, that prefer that type of communication style, they complain they receive too long emails. So sometimes it could take them some more extra time to respond, sometimes because they're not native speakers, even some of them. So maybe a few days or a few hours, and there is like different time zones. So it could create lots of friction. And on the other hand, I hear people here in the US are saying that why the other teams, overseas could come across as short. Like I send you the email, just read the email. What's the problem? But the thing is that these people prefer, give me the TLDR. Just tell me what you want me to do, right? But the truth is that in the US, it could take time until people reach the level of request, right? Because they don't feel comfortable being too blunt. But in other cultures, like we said before, like in Israel, Italy, Mexico, even people could form of communication again would be shorter,
Very sure.
so
Mhm.
they could come across as too blunt, and here the frictions begin. So let's say that if we work together and you feel that I'm not giving you enough context, right? You can feel that I'm less professional or it's rude or it's because I don't care, right? But
Right.
maybe if you're being aware from cultural perspective, you can say to yourself, oh, maybe we have a cultural gap here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when we're not aware to the fact that there is a cultural gap, people could think that maybe I'm not sharing more context with you because I'm hiding something, right?
That's right. That's right.
And again, all the thoughts, all the we have, our own loop in our heads, and of course, negativity is gravity, and you can only imagine what happens from their point. So this is like a small tip of how can you recognize different, behaviors, and ask yourself how can we manage why this is happening. First thing.
Exactly. And I'll even chime in there, even for people that are just in the United States, different areas of the country kind of communicate or operate and work at different paces. Because I'll just say in the South where I am in Atlanta, we're very business minded and business focused, but for the most part, we would not dream of having a business meeting without some social chat or conversation or introductory coffee and talking about your family and that kind of thing. And I so remember, a lot of times when I go to the Northeast, New York or Boston, some of the more faster paced lifestyles, if you will, they're more to what you say in general. And I hate the stereotype, but in general, they're more kind of direct. They do say hello, a little greeting, but then they're back, right to the point a lot of the time. So you just have to be sensitive to who you're talking to, right? And where they're living, and be sensitive to the way they like to work, I guess is what I was trying to say.
Exactly. And you've mentioned something that is very important, which is, we are generalized. It's like a good disclaimer because we are generalizing. We can't
Yeah,
really talk about cultural differences without generalizing.
that's
But
right.
however, we need to remember that we have different personality types. We live in different areas. Like you said, the US is like a huge country, right? Different
You.
states, different culture. There are subcultures.
Yes,
And we need to be mindful to the person we're engaging with and make sure, because the personality type would always be stronger than any cultural background. So we need to be
absolutely.
mindful of that as well. And I agree.
And so if you could give recommendations of things to make sure you don't do, like common traps or big no-nos or mistakes that you don't want people to do or people should be mindful of, what are a couple that you'd love to share with the listeners?
Okay. So maybe the best tip we can give to people, there is a book on personal level. It changed my life. It's called The Culture Map. Have you heard about this book before?
I have heard of the culture map. Yes.
Yeah, so it's an amazing book. It was written by Professor Erin Meyer from INSEAD. And Professor Meyer and her team, they analyzed more than 50 cultures around the world. And they positioned them on 8 different scales in a way that allow us to compare cultures that we work with and understand how cultural differences could potentially impact the way we work together, the way we do business together. The first tip I would ever give to anyone is to go to the culture map and see and map all the cultures that you work with and understand if there is a gap. Because wherever we see a gap where, in terms of like where the cultures are, where we position them on the scale, we know that there is a potential friction. And by the way, even if the gap is small, there is still, we can still feel, the gap here. And I have lots of examples on that as well. But so this is like the first thing that I would do, right? Go and look for that. A few things that I would recommend people not doing. So first, try not to assume that everyone thinks like you. Like we said before, one of the biggest mistakes is expecting others, to approach work, communication, decision making, even solve conflicts in the same way that we do, right? Just because something looks normal in your culture doesn't mean that it's universal, right? And second, of course, like we said before, we judge behaviors too quickly. So if something happened, I would pause for a second and ask, could this be cultural,
Yes.
difference? Also, I would say something that sometimes we ignore the power of relationships, right? So in
Yes.
some cultures, people, use more personal relationships, invest more in in personal connections,
Yeah.
right? Like in Latin America and the Middle East, cultures like China. So
France.
jumping straight to business, even if we did a small talk, but jumping straight to business could hurt the relationships. Like there is,
Absolutely.
and it's extremely important to say because the US, for example, maybe we'll give a context and we have when we talk about trust and remember the culture map, there is a scale that called, we talk about trust. We have two
Yes.
types of cultures. There are task-based cultures and relationship-based cultures.
Right.
In task based cultures, usually we try to create, we try to make a personal connection, right? But what is more important is to be professional, like to demonstrate that we're reliable and transparent. And what is really matter is the written agreement, meaning that we can still be friends, but I need you to sign the contract, right?
Right.
Versus relationship-based cultures, which is we need to have that, that emotional bonding, right? Even if we work together. Meaning that if, like a handshake, for example, if I gave you my word, it means that the deal is closed, right?
Yes.
So it's extremely important. In other words, there are cultures that are mixing that business is business and business is personal, is more
Right.
personal. So let's say, in the US, by the way, is the most task-based culture on earth. This is why I mention it here, because there's a businessman from Dubai that told me once that in Dubai, the first 3 to 4 meetings are just, it's for us to get to know each other.
Know each other, right?
And if we talk about business, it will end right away because people could feel that you came to take advantage of them. So that's extremely important. So this is why the culture map, it's like it could help us to navigate. And last, maybe, and I think we talked about it as well, is that we need to listen more and not rely only on words, right?
Yeah.
Body language, tone of voice, and silence can play a big role in the way we communicate. Because in some cultures, like we've mentioned Japan, what's not said is often just, is also important, as what is
Absolutely.
being said. So just
No,
generally speaking.
I love that. You're absolutely right. That has been my experience in from different cultures. And I'm just curious if we can dive into maybe a little bit of your offerings and services. How do you help teams become more culturally sensitive? And, what type of offerings does your company do or interventions do they do?
So usually when I come, I do a very quick needs analysis. So I would ask to usually the HR to connect me with the most verbal people they have with the different
I bet
sites.
they know, right?
They know because we need verbal people.
Right.
And I'm asking them to make a connection. Then I'll have like a call with them. And during this call, I want to hear as many stories as they can tell me, right? Different anecdotes. Where do they feel the friction, right? Where do they feel the challenges? And based on their stories, I can come back to the HR manager and say, listen, among all the cultural challenges that we usually see among global teams, here I see that one of the biggest challenges would be, let's say, communication, feedback, trust, or you have some problems around conflict management, right? So let's do between 1 to 3 workshops, like training sessions that could help you guys to overcome those problems that you have, because we can solve it very quickly. So usually we will do the workshops.
Okay.
Then some companies would like to buy additional, package of like a few hours, so I can sit, with their managers and help them to figure out, more specific cases that they have.
And
And
how to
there is
manage.
another type of company that say, listen, I feel that the team in the UK, let's say, that's a new case that I have, are not engaged enough. I want you to go and I want you to talk to them and let me know what's going on there. So of course, my only rule is that all those conversations are confidential, meaning that I would never say who said what, but I'm going
Exactly.
to give you like an overview about what's going on. And so everything is custom for good and for bad. It's not always that good in our business, as you know, because it's
I know it's tough, but in order to get trust with the employees that you're talking to, it has to be confidential, and the executives need to honor that. I put that in all my contracts. I'll give you trends or things that we're seeing, but I
Exactly.
will never give you verbatims and who said what.
Never,
Never.
never. I
Yeah,
agree with you. Yeah, because we build trust, right?
that's right.
They
That's
trust
right.
us, so we need to deliver, and that's it pretty much. So it's more like a quick interventions. It's not like a long term. Like so, I used to be a consultant with PwC, so it was a different business model, different interactions. But it's more. I love when it's like shorter. I don't know. I just love the quicker interactions. I just love to give people tools. Take it from here. Because again, we also you and I, Karen, we don't come with a magic wand, right?
No, we
we,
don't.
we need to work with proactive leaders that want to be better, that have a growth mindset.
Yeah,
And that's it. That's the partnership.
yeah. And I hope you don't mind me asking, and if it's a little sensitive, please let me know. But, in our current administration in the US, there's a lot of controversy and companies trying to figure out how to address DEI and respect cultural differences, but kind of taking the wording and nomenclature out. I'm just curious, is that impacting how you approach your business and your coaching, or are you continuing on as is?
As is, because at the
Good.
end of the day, we can call it in different ways, but it's a fact. I live in New York. You live also in America, right?
Yes,
We work with global companies. We work with immigrants.
absolutely. Yes.
Even myself, right? I live here for
Yeah,
the last 5, 6 years, but I originally came from Israel, right? So again, if we want to address it, it's going to be hard for us to execute in a better
that's
way because it causes friction. Like we
right.
said before, if there is a communication gap and I'm not aware of the cultural reason, right, I could think that, okay, I don't want to work with her anymore, right? She's not reliable, or I can. So, of course, it could damage the relationship, it could hurt the company. So,
It
if we want to have a greater economy, a stronger economy, again, you can call it the way you want. We need to work on cultural differences. Again, I'm biased. We need to
Me
say that.
too, in full transparency. Yes.
Exactly. Full transparency, we're biased. But again, I felt that. I
Yeah,
felt, and we all know what happens when we're not addressing it. So what's the price?
that's right.
The price is higher. So
It is hard. And, there's a million research studies out there, from widely respected outlets such as, Gartner and, you name it, that have shown how being very sensitive and culturally sensitive really positively impacts business earnings. So if you're really talking about the bottom dollar, this is one, in my opinion, Karen's opinion, this is one reason why we still need to keep a focus on it.
but you're right, it's research based. Like
Yes,
the
absolutely.
more your team will be more global, and again, and let's assume that they know how to work together. Because like
Yeah.
we said before, it's
It's a big
not
assumption, but yes.
easy. But if you gave them the training, you gave
Yeah.
them the platform, and by the way, the book that we've mentioned could be
Yeah.
a great platform to any
Oh,
global team.
absolutely.
So once they figure out how they can work better together, overcome those gaps, in terms of performance, we're seeing a better results. Like, again, as long as you have a more diverse team, but only once they know how to work together. So it's
Absolutely.
absolutely has an impact on the bottom line results.
So spot on. Well, Ms. Nama, we cannot let you get away from us on this podcast without answering our signature question. And as you know, it came from the research that we did for our book, Lead at the Top of Your Game, on high performing organizations and teams. And you were so kind to share with us that leading with stakeholder savvy really resonated with you. And so, for my newer listeners out there, stakeholder savvy is all about just what we were talking about, believe it or not, on the podcast today, which is why I wasn't shocked when Naima selected it. But it's all about making sure that you have the ability to show up and be flexible and appreciate people in different social situations. And we use social broadly, meaning it can be business social, personal social, or what have you. And it's basically like emotional intelligence, being very sensitive to the situation you're in, who you're speaking to, being respectful of their perspectives, and being able to operate effectively no matter what environment you find yourself in. So, curious minds want to know, Ms. Nama, why did stakeholder savvy really resonate with you?
Because I feel like once you describe what does it mean, I look back on my career and I'm like, wow, this is exactly me, right? Because
Uh-huh.
I started my career in the private sector. So I worked in the Israeli parliament with the head of the opposition back then. Now he's the Israeli president. So I was lucky enough to work with him. Next, I went to serve in the Israeli embassy in Washington. And from there, I did business development for a Canadian company, moved to the tech industry, I spent some time in venture capital. And today, right, 5 years ago, I did a transition to the organizational world. So I did lots of roles.
You have been, and still so young to have been doing that.
Turned 36. We can debate that. I only look young. I only look young. So I feel that what allowed me to operate effectively in different workplaces, dynamics along the years was the fact that I'm like a bit of like chameleon in a way. Term, by the way, chameleon leadership. So so I feel it's really related
Yeah.
to the tech savvy, to the stakeholder savvy term that you've just mentioned. This is type of abilities and skills that allow me to navigate between different roles and dynamics and worlds, and so it's part of who I am. So
Yeah, it's part of you, who you are. And I believe that's why it resonated with you so much. So
Exactly.
thank you for sharing that with us. Now, we're going to have a ton of information in our show notes about you, your bio, links to where to find you. But I always love to give airtime on the podcast as well for people. So if you don't mind, can you share if people want to know more about your business or more about you as a professional, where are the best places for them to find you?
So I have a website, which we can put a link if you'd like. LinkedIn would be also a great option. I always love to connect with people. And if you have any questions, feel free, of course, to reach out. I always respond or, try as much as possible, of course, and
Sure.
answer questions. And I have an Instagram account, but for now it's in Hebrew, but I'll start to post more in English, I promise.
Okay.
If you're Hebrew
Maybe
speaker,
alternate.
Instagram, and if not, so in LinkedIn, I'll post more videos later on as well. So
Very cool. All right. Well, we'll have those links in our show notes for you listeners. But thank you so much for the gift of your time. We really appreciate you speaking on such a very important topic. And I truly believe that the work you're doing is really going to make an impact on companies both now and in the future.
thank you so much for having me and for investing in this
Absolutely.
topic.
And thank you to listeners for the gift of your time. Because as I always love to say, I truly take your patronage sincerely. You could literally be listening to millions of other podcasts, but you're here with us and we truly appreciate it. All that we ask is that you like and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform of choice. And be sure to share our podcast with just one friend, because by doing so, we'll all be better to lead at the top of our games. Thanks so much and see you next week. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we help you lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. You can check out the show notes, additional episodes, bonus resources, and also submit guest recommendations on our website at leadyourgamepodcast.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn by searching for the name Karen Rhodes, with Karen being spelled Karan. And if you like the show, the greatest gift you can give would be to subscribe and leave a rating on your podcast platform of choice. This podcast has been a production of Shockingly Different Leadership, a global consultancy which helps organizations execute their people, talent development, and organizational effectiveness initiatives on an on-demand project or contract basis. Huge thanks to our production and editing team for a job well done. Goodbye for now.